Hello out there, YouTube land. Miles Cook. Miles here with Miles on Cars. This wasn't going to be the prettiest video ever, but I'm hoping it'll be informative. I'm not going to show step by step, but I'm going to try to describe step by step based on my ability with writing for 30 years and a bunch of other stuff. Long story short, I just installed a new fuel pump in my E-150 van. It's a Ford E-150 with a 4.6 liter 2-valve V8, same as 99, 96 to 04 Mustangs basically. So long story short, I installed a new fuel pump. Long story a little bit longer, maybe 10 or 12 minutes here. I was able to do it by myself without a hoist. Some people probably wouldn't want to do this on their back. You know, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but to be honest, it was probably not as difficult as I expected. So I'll just try to explain as best I can. The reason I had to put a new fuel pump in it is because I'm kind of stupid in a way. I kind of screwed up because I let the van sit for about 6 or 7 months without starting it. And so a good friend of mine, buddy's got a shop. He said, oh, if you let it sit, you know, that's a pretty good chance that'll kill the pump. Well, he was right. So anyway, let's get to the goodies, the nitty gritty. You can see here, the job is done. I finished it, I've completed it. I've done everything but take it down off the jack stands. So the first thing you gotta do is put it up on jack stands. You gotta jack the van up, or the vehicle, you know, F-150, E-150, you know, if it's a Mustang, then you're just dropping the tank from the back of the car. Probably an F-150, I don't know for sure about that, but I know on this E-150, the tank is on the side. So what you really need to do, and it's not that hard, is you just have to jack the van up high enough, and you can see with the jack stands that I have, you've got to get the van up high enough in order to loosen the straps that hold the tank in place and then lower the tank. And you need a floor jack. You need at least 2 jack stands and a floor jack in order to, and I did this on dirt with that piece of plywood you see in the screen there. What you need, you know, like I said, you have to get the van. You don't need to even you don't have to take the wheels off the ground. Just get it high enough in order to, you know, lower the tank with the floor jack down away from the van, and then you're able to, you know, essentially pull the tank out from under the van in order to, you know, go in the tank. You know, you have to remove the pump from the tank. So anyway, I got the tank down, and then I was able to disconnect the fuel line. You have to go to an auto parts store and buy a fuel line removal tool for a Ford, you know, unless you want to make a tool out of a chapstick container, which I've seen people do. You can do that if you want, but the fuel tool, the fuel line removal tool is only about 9 minutes. It's only about $9, maybe $10. So on my van, I had to get the big one because the return line going into the tank was the big size for the removal of the 2 lines. You know, basically the pressure line and the return line on the tank. And so what I was able to do was lower the tank down and then get up in there and remove those 2 lines with the removal tool. Actually, I think I was able to pull the tank out pretty much out from under the van in order to remove those 2 lines, the return line, the large one, and the fuel pressure line, which is the standard. I believe it's a 3/8. There's also, of course, an electrical plug for the electric fuel pump, so I had to undo that as well. And I think I did that before pulling the tank out from under the van. Little side note, you know, there's a few guys on here with these videos. You know, they cut a hole in the floor of the van in order to access the fuel pump from the top. If you have a fairly halfway decent van, like I consider mine to be, I mean, it isn't great, but it's not a total pile of crap. I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, to me, this is the way to go. It's a pain in the ass in a certain sense, but if you're lucky and the van is relatively dry and it's not rusty, this van's just got a bunch of Arizona soil caked onto it, so it's almost like a rust inhibitor, almost like it's got a coating under there. So I got the tank out from under the van, and then basically pulled the tank away from the van far enough to basically sit in a chair, undo the 6 bolts that hold the tank, that hold the pump in the tank, and then you know, basically remove the pump from the tank. And so what you basically do at that point is you have to remove the pump from I call it a cage, the guys at the auto parts store call it a hanger. It's basically the hanging thing that, the pump hangs in the tank from this hanger, and so you have to remove the pump from the hanger, and it's actually not that difficult to do. And so I'm actually charging the battery on my van right now with my Focus. So you remove the pump from the hanger. There are options if you want. You could buy a whole new hanger and pump. It's probably about $300 or more. But I don't think, most people, you're not really going to want to do that, because you want to retain the original Ford hanger, or cage, I actually call it sometimes. I call it the cage or the hanger, which is basically, the mounting point of the pump when it's dropped back into the tank. And so you basically, you remove the whole assembly from the tank, and then you remove the pump from the hanger or the cage, whatever you want to call it. And so that there's a strap that you remove, there's a zip tie you have to cut, and there's an original OE style clamp that you have to basically kind of break off in order to remove the pump from the hose it's connected to on the in the hanger, in the cage. And so once you and then there's also there's a sock on the bottom of the pump. And so one little bit of information I kind of learned as I go along, I was looking at the old pump and I'm like, how do I remove the sock from the pump? Well, or the strainer, as it's sometimes called. Well, you don't bother with that, because basically when you get a new pump, you're going to get a new strainer to go with it. So that's another little piece of information you're going to want to kind of keep in mind. So what I did, I took the old pump and I went up to my local AutoZone, and I walked in there, and I actually had to go to a second location because the first one they didn't have it. It was no big deal. So I went into the AutoZone that had it in stock. I gave them the part number, which I think was, let me take a look here. Again, not the prettiest video ever, but I can give you the part number for the pump. It's A as in Albert 1199 A1199EP. So it's Albert 1199 Edward Paul, and this is a true grade OE style fuel pump. And so what I was able to do, I was very pleasantly surprised when I walked out of the store with that new pump. And the reason is because I was a little concerned about, I'm going to need new hose clamps to reinstall the pump into the hanger, into the cage. And what about the zip tie? There's these little knick-knack things. And so the really cool thing with that part number for an E-150 Ford van is that basically everything was included with the pump, even a gasket to install the hanger back into the tank, which I didn't need because the one that was in there was perfectly good. So I got the new pump, and it came with everything. It came with the zip tie, the hose clamps, everything and a new sock. Again, that's an important point. A new sock, a new strainer that you install on the bottom of the pump. You have to it's like a press fit sort of arrangement. You press it onto the pump, and then it doesn't quite snap into place, but there's also a little circular tab sort of thing that also presses on along with the sock going into the pump where it picks up the fuel. So I put the sock on the pump, the strainer. I installed the pump back into the cage or the hanger, cage hanger. I always say one or the other. And so that involved basically putting it back in place. I also, the new pump came with a hose to connect it to the cage, but I actually didn't reuse. I just reused the old one because it was just easier to push it on and then put on the new hose clamp. So new hose clamp, tied it down there's a strap that holds the pump to the cage with a little bolt, and then you zip tie. There's like a sort of there's an external hose from the cage that zip ties to the side of the pump, and then there's the strainer. Basically, the strainer or the sock goes onto the pump, and you put that all, reassemble it back together, and then the whole assembly goes back into the tank. The other thing you're going to want to do is take a screwdriver and scratch a little scratch an indentation on the pump housing, the cage housing as it goes into the tank, and then the tank itself, so you make sure that it's clocked the exact same way when you go to pull it out. When you pull it out, you want to be able to put it back in the same way. So you put the pump back in like I did, tighten down the 6 bolts, basically kind of in a wheel lug pattern, almost like maybe a star pattern. and then slide the tank back into place. And you have to, the hardest part to an extent, doing it completely alone, but I made it work, was, and I had to essentially do 2 or 3 things at once, or 4 things in my case, because I was working on dirt. I had to get the floor jack and the piece of plywood and the fuel tank all arranged in the proper orientation in order to be able to, I had to basically lift the tank onto the jack in order to, and then slide the jack under the tank in order to jack the tank back up into the van. And so I was able to do that in order to basically jack the tank back up into place, and then reinstall, or if I didn't mention at the beginning of the video, reinstall the 2 straps that hold the tank in place. I think maybe I didn't mention at the beginning, you basically, you have the floor jack underneath the tank, and then you loosen the straps and basically loosen and remove them, sort of get them out of the way, and then lower the tank once the straps are off of the tank. And so once I reconnected the hoses, I got the tank back into place and reconnected the fuel line and the return line and the electrical line back into place before basically jacking the tank back up into the van. And then the other thing I also had to do, which I haven't mentioned, is you have to remove and replace the filler neck. You have to remove the neck from the side of the van, and you have to unhook the hose from the filler neck. It's going to be a dried rubber hose, which is kind of a pain in the ass to get off because the hose is old, but maybe a little spray lubricant to get it back on. That's what I did, and I made that work. So got the tank back up into place, got all the hoses back connected, and I even tried to listen a couple of times to see if I could hear the fuel pump prime a couple times, but I couldn't hear it, maybe because it was so quiet. But long story short, back to the short version, I made it work. So there you have it. Pretty exciting for me. As I get a little older, I'm not swinging as many wrenches as I used to, but I can do a few things here and there, working on my old junkers like my Fairlane and my Mustang, which you'll see sometime down the road here on this glorious, wonderful channel. In the meantime, my Focus, which you've seen in the video, and the Econoline E-150 van, which I bought on Arizona Craigslist in Pine Top, Arizona, from a dealership. I can't remember the name of the dealership, but they're a fantastic dealer. It's an E-150 with a 4.62 valve, 180,000 miles, runs and drives like a brand new van. Tows a Focus with a tow dolly, piece of cake, no problem. This is a cargo van. And but that's how you basically install a new fuel a new fuel pump in pretty much just about any late model Ford vehicle. You ostensibly have to drop the tank and access the pump from the top of the tank. So, I know there's tons of other videos on this already, but I just thought I'd kind of throw in my version and also say, don't cut a hole in your van to access the tank. You're much better off dropping the tank and accessing, you take a few hours or an hour or two to drop the tank like I did. The next day I spent the evening removing the pump and going to the auto parts store. I had to buy the fuel line removal tool. And then, and the next day after that, or, later the next day, I went to the auto parts store and found the pump. Take your old pump with you and the cage. Take the hanger with you. Take both of them to the auto parts store and say, here, this is my pump. Because the other thing the new pump that came with was really awesome. Probably the best part of the new pump of all was I looked at the pump and I was worried that, oh, the plug is not the right plug for the one that's on the hanger, on the cage. Well, the new pump came with a jumper harness in order to connect the existing cage hanger connector in the van to the new pump. So it basically is like an adapter harness that new pump actually came with. So there you have it. New fuel pump and a late model EFI Ford. So vans, pickups, SUVs, cars, trucks, Mustangs, the access to the pump is going to be the same. Or I'm sorry, it's going to be different. Naturally, the access to the pump is going to be very different. Like on a Mustang, the tank is at the back. It's quite a bit smaller. On a van, hopefully my tank was only about 3 or 4 gallons. It was basically empty. So if you have 40 gallons of fuel in your Econoline van and you're going to do a pump, you're going to have to siphon some of the gas out. And so I was lucky because I only had basically maybe 4 gallons in the tank. So the tank was relatively light. I mean, I was able to actually wrestle the tank onto the floor jack on my back by myself, and I actually basically pushed the floor jack under the tank with my hips in order to get the jack under the tank, in order to jack the tank up back into the van. So again, you know, if it's a late model Ford, Mustang, Explorer, you know, F-150, I think those are side mount tanks. I know some of the vans have double tanks, so I guess there's basically only going to be one pump in one of the tanks. That I'm not sure. But anyway, that's kind of the some of the highlights and some of the notes of the installation. If this is any help to anyone, I would hope it would be. That's the main point here. There's not much visual here. This is mostly a functional and informational video. It's not like, for example, the Cobra Jet Mustangs I show in the my earlier video, or I showed one of my my Cadillac CTS-V that I once owned when I was in Lansing, Michigan, where the car was built. Those are certainly a lot more interesting visually, but this one is more of an informational type of thing. And so I hope it helps you if you happen to own an Econoline van or some other late model Ford vehicle that would need a new fuel pump. Thanks, and see you next time.